Hello. Um, my degree is in is from Baylor University as a Bachelor of Arts in Communication. Um, Basically, the degree at the time of my I guess progress through Baylor's program, communications program. Uh, it was basically radio, TV, film with some additional public speaking and journalism classes, you know, as part of it. So when I talk about, and I basically made a point of trying to learn a little something about everything that went into production. So, what did I study as a Baylor student? Um, I studied how to work cameras, what the various functions and things were. I learned how to work audio equipment. I learned how to edit. I learned the aesthetics of it all. Framing, editing, color, and you know, tone, light, light levels, exposures. Um, I also learned how to do certain digital effects, how to do titling, how to work as a technical director. That is, when you see somebody in a booth, in a broadcast booth, and they're going roll on one, roll on two, or that sort of thing, camera one, camera two, that sort of thing, given those sorts of orders, that's a technical director. Um, I was also, pardon me, part of an HD project back in the year 2000. You know, 25 years ago, back when the transition to um, from standard definition was anything but absolutely certain. Um, the but the point of what and also, and I'm fairly proud of this. I learned how to operate a computer animation software package. I learned Lightwave 5.5, 6.0, and then 7.0. And and because of that, I understand something about how CGI actually works. So I'm telling you all this because I've got an article to respond to. Let's see. All right. So the title of the article is "Calling Everything AI Slop Isn't Criticism, It's Gatekeeping." Am I gatekeeping? Um, y- the question is, what am I gatekeeping from? It's not as if I have any control over whether or not people go and use AI. But let's see, what are his arguments? Back in the late '80s and early '90s, my brother and I got our hands on electronic music tools. Hmm. I got hold of those in the late '90s myself, and then later on, throughout the next couple of decades, I actually did some work. I actually did some work with something called um, acid music. Um, well, it's basically a loop-based program. So yeah, I've worked with that stuff too. I've worked with digital audio. Um, um, I worked with digital audio workstations like let's see, what was it? I think Audacity. I think it was a freeware one, but I worked with another one, and I used that to make a very poor man's imitation of that scene in Last of the Mohicans, where the English column coming from that fort that the French um, took over. You know, the English column gets ambushed by Magua's people, uh, and there's this section I saw in this sort of making of featurette that or some Oscar footage that showed how, you know, the sound of the muskets going off from the sides, and you know the people, you know, running, you know, the Native Americans running at the British column, how that kind of unfolded. And I tried to do something similar, only it was supposed to be sort of monsters. But I still had to do work. In fact, I had to have quite a bit of help from, you know, for the final product. I had needed quite a bit of help from the teachers because, you know, I'm not. I don't think I'm a naturally good at audio stuff. Um, I did learn how to use acid music for you know, composing music, but you know, again, it's not something that I was particularly good at. But at least I could do this sort of. I could bunch something together and just get it going by the vibe of it. But you know, the thing I'd want to point out is that even there, you still have to put things together. You still have to work if you want to make something that sounds good. If you want to get up to that level of being decent at what you're doing, you do need to work at it. Um, let's see. Was it synthesizers, samplers, weird machines with buttons that didn't make sense until they suddenly did? And most importantly, a sound card, a new invention in the world of computers that allowed anybody to bypass the entire music industry and just record music at home. That, yeah, that's good. But you still needed to put in the work. You still needed to play the instruments, or if you were on the synthesizer, you still needed to put together notes in a way that pleased the ear. That's the thing. That's the gatekeeping that you really cannot avoid. That's the gate that you really cannot cross over into until you're actually doing it yourself, until you're actually competent. Now, anybody can buy a synthesizer. Anybody can buy a, you know, Ask Music or these other, com- you know, these other, you know, like Ableton or things like that. These other music making programs. Just type it into your search engine, and it'll bring up a variety of programs that can do that for you. But they'll ask something of you. They'll ask that you kind of, you know, and this is part of why I didn't continue along the path of being a this is part of why I didn't continue along the path of being a music maker because as good as the product came out, I just I couldn't kind of translate what was up here out there, and there were things that I was more interested in learning how to do and do well. Now he goes out. Meanwhile, outside the room, the reaction around the world was very different. Soulless, not real music. This is the end of music. Sampling is stealing. Um, it's like there are some situations where it was like like for example, um, Bittersweet Symphony. Where they basically just wholesale ripped off a riff from, and there are others like that. Where they wholesale ripped off tracks from other people, where it's like, okay, once you hear the source, it's sort of like, uh, what, what exactly did you contribute here? And that's a fair question. That should be a fair question. Um, that's not being, it's not being a gatekeeper. That's asking, did you do the work to make this great music, or did somebody else do? And that's a fair question. It's the music, and it's part of why I didn't go too far with the loop-based music, because really, I had no talent for it. I had no, or at the very least, I didn't want to work hard enough at the subject in question and take the time to do that. I didn't want to do that enough so that I could expand beyond simply, programming the loops and giving it, the soul of what I wanted. I mean, if push comes to shove, I can and I have scored videos with that program, and I really enjoy it. But ex- it doesn't express what I need to express, and that's the thing. The translation from what's up here, what's in here, out of a person. Now you can say, well, with AI, I can sort of just, what you'll be doing, quite frankly, is you're going to be doing a whole lot of rejecting stuff that the AI pumps out, and you'll never really get what you really want. You'll always be getting something that's just good enough. And you'll always be getting, just averaged garbage. And note the ed at the end of average right there. Averaged, as in averaged from. I mean, it's one thing to get samples and to get, synthesizer. Let me tell you something. Some of the most heartfelt music of the 70s and 80s came out of synthesizers, and we love it. We love it. Good synthesizer music is no different than any other good kind of music. Yeah, it's just, some of it's an acquired taste, and to make it sound good, I mean, look at Vangelis's score for Blade Runner. That's an electronic score right there. Look at the score for Tron by Wendy Carlos. Look at the score for. I mean, there are some scores, where it dates it, that that it sounds, synthesizer lane. But in other cases, folks knew how to work the instrument, how to work the digital side of things to make it sound heartfelt, to make it sound good. And like, it's just a different kind of instrumentation. It's not simply about, anybody can make music. Not everybody can. Not everybody can go and make something that actually, not everybody can express themselves. And this isn't because somebody prevented them from doing so. I mean, you look at the history of many artists, and it's like some people just. I mean, look, if you want an example of a group that made their bones using electronic technology, the Eurythmics. Sweet dreams are made of this. I don't remember the full story, but they basically were sitting in an apartment using, I guess, the most um, primitive, electronic equipment they could get their hands on. The stuff that was affordable to them, and they ended up making one of the most uh, iconic music tracks of all time, of especially of the 80s. And what allowed them to do that was their understanding of the music, their understanding of what they were doing. And that's a gate that, you know that gate isn't kept by, the gate for real music is not kept by some studio or some record label or whoever. The gate for real music is kept by your skills. I'm getting kind of annoyed with the lead, so it's not about. Now here he goes. They talk about Photoshop. They talk about 3D animation attempts. They talk about electric guitars and the camera. It's this garbage again. It's this. It's like people who argue about Galileo and stuff when it comes to science, when they're trying to sell their own particular, you know, easy peasy, boiled down AI version of it. It's like, I mean, here's the thing. When we talk about synthesizers, I am actually a Photoshop artist. You know, I was the sole. Well, I took some images from elsewhere, but you know, the face is mine, of course. I edited that in Photoshop, with multiple layers. Did multiple things to it. I took a landscape photo off the internet and I made it unrecognizable. I just put it through so many different changes just to get that neon glow look. But that's the thing. I did work to create what was there. I did work in order to, uh, pieces of it might have been done by other people, but I took what was there and I remade it. But I did the remaking. I made the decisions. Okay. Is it going to be, is this layer here going to be a difference layer? Is it going to be a screen layer? Is this, how am I going to position this element? How, I even squeezed in my face to give myself a starved look because the joke with the original image was I've seen too much. So, before it's like you want to, when you use Photoshop, it's not merely, well, you can these days have it do little AI things, but I don't use those features. I don't want to use those features. I want to basically do a lot of this stuff myself. And why? Well, because I can make it how I please. I can I can decide how it is, you know, composed. I can decide the lighting, you know? Like I can decide how I want things to move. I can decide what the tone and the emotional idea of it's going to be. And I'm not simply telling something how it's going to do it. I'm figuring out with great nuance. I'm doing that with great nuance on my own. And that's the thing. The details matter. And with AI, you have no control over the details. You have 3D animation. Let me tell you about 3D animation. Yeah, you can automate a lot in 3D animation, but at the basic level, what makes 3D animation both challenging and rewarding is that you're basically deciding how everything from the ground up exists. You shape the object, you decide what the geometry of the object is, you decide what how the surface of that object is going to interact with the lights. You decide what the camera is going to be. You decide how much, resolution you're going to get off of that. You the tools there, if you wanted to physically or to seem to physically interact with something else, you have to simulate that. If you wanted to have a certain subsurface scattering to it, you need to simulate that. If you wanted to have, lighting such that you get uh, the appearance of a bounce effect, like Like, let's see. What's something with color I can demonstrate this with? Let's see. Now we have a yellow wrapper, and I am bouncing. See this yellow wrapper right there? Okay, so I am bouncing light off of that. And if it's, well, let's see. Yeah, you see that right there? The way that yellow, I mean, in fact, the fact that you're seeing light bounce off of my palm, that's only because it's bouncing off of the wrapper. And it's bouncing off of my palm and showing a little bit of the color. I was uh, I was in college right about 1998 to 2002. So that was a particularly exciting time, I think, for computer animation. I actually did some experiments with photogrammetry. I actually did some experiments while I was a student with HDRI uh, rendering. I actually rendered this one object with an HDRI plugin, and as a result, it looked fantastic because what it was doing was, when you render with an HDRI image around it, you can use the image itself captures the lights around the object, like the sun or glare off a window or the radiosity off of objects all around, and it calculates, if you use other general illumination, it calculates what it would look like in that environment, and the results are stunning. You've seen them before because they're part of what you see sometimes in 3D animation these days. You know, getting that sort of real world sort of bounce effect of all the different lights all around. And that's the lovely thing. And it's this is this is part of this is part of why I'm not the world's biggest fan of people going bad CGI. Well, it's an open question how efficient and how effective movie studios are with how they deal with computer animation studios and CGI in their films. And world's I'm not completely opposed to the whole practical effects thing because I learned the hard way that a lot of the work you have to do, a lot of the things you have to do in order to make an image convincing, the real world does for free. So if you can do something in the real world, at the very least, I mean, it's often a good idea to have something, a model of something in the world, like a big armature or animatronic, it's so you can at least see how the creature looks under the lighting and everything of the actual scene. And that way it looks like it fits in. That's one of the hardest things to make something look like it fits into the scene. And it's not always a bad thing to do practical effects, or as they used to call them, special effects. I could do a whole video on that subject, but suffice it to say, what what the problem with early 3D animation attempts is just getting that sort of getting all those different sort of parts of the optical rendering right. Like, I learned the hard way that if you include reflections, if you include ray traced shadows, I had to learn what ray tracing was. If you do refraction, if you do caustics or radiosity or all these other things, it adds to the render. And I also learned the hard way that rendering animations takes time. It takes time. I had to watch these very simple, very rudimentary animations I was doing. I wasn't doing any, Pixar sort of, you know, masterpieces. You understand? I was, doing just rudimentary animations, and yet it would take minutes per frame. And at 24 frames per second, you do the math. If you're doing minutes per frame, it would take hours to render something that would pass by in seconds. And that's the thing. That's the thing. Learning things, learning what makes it, they had to learn all kinds of things in order to make 3D animation actually look like more than just a curiosity. I am old enough. I am old enough that when I was a child, the whole the Genesis effect, that was one of the movies I grew up on. The Genesis effect. That was one of the first um, rendered CGIs for, I was, of the generation that had Tron on repeat, on, that had, um, I grew up on The Last Starfighter, you know. I didn't even realize it was computer animated. That's the thing. We just, when you're a kid, you don't really question what you're looking at. As I grew older, I began to notice that there were these, on these programs, on these special programs that would show these neat looking but sort of abstract looking animations. It wouldn't be until, you get Toy Story in 1995, um, well over 30 years ago at this point, that you actually see the, that you actually see more and more kind of photorealism, more and more complexity. Um, and it's also the special effects, um, coming from, you know, I grew up with that stuff, and I wanted to learn that stuff, and I did learn that stuff. And again, it's sort of, I'd learn more of it if I had more time, but I primarily concentrated myself on doing a particular set of writing. That's what, because, I can computer animate something and take, hours to make it happen. Or I can write something and make that come alive at least that much. Uh, and that's the choice I made. Electric guitars, like if you think nobody, I mean, the moment they were introduced, more or less, people were using them and people were, I mean, and it didn't rub everybody the right way, but you know what? It's like it was a new sound and it took off. They hated, they feared it, they said it's the death of art. Well, what is he saying now? This is the part people don't like admitting with it. Controversial, not have it time, just bad. Well, it's like this. It's like this. You know, CGI as it developed went, it had to prove itself. People weren't just going to, just it's it had to go from a curiosity to something that could stand up to scrutiny on screen. It had to go from just being, you know, blobby stuff in a music video. Like you want an early example? Try "Money for Nothing," Dire Straits, their 1985 video with the blocky guys going like, "Yes, yes, yes, yes," looking like robots. It's like, okay, you can. That's never going to stand up, next to somebody else, and they have to make the. I mean, it's one of the reasons why people in Tron wore helmets because they had to cut those people out of the on the green screens and whatever. And if you had to rotoscope somebody with hair, that's a nightmare. Another thing that you learn about, like AI slop, people talk about it. I mean, you look at something like Quarter Crew and what they're doing with AI, but it's they're using machine learning. They're using it to do work. They're using it to help them with a production process. They're using it, like to do creative sort of, as creative tools. Like they're using it in order to turn their themselves into anime, like to turn themselves to learn how to separate objects, do better green screen pulls so that they can, more easily put together this son of a dungeon um show that they're working on, which features constant integration of elements, compositing of elements, and CG and things like that. You don't, they're not simply using it, you know, entering a prompt and just okay, here you go. It's they're teaching a computer how to parse a person, an object from the background, from the green screen, and do so with a minimum of of contamination from it, and that is work. They're saving themselves some work, but it's so that they can do more work, so they can use their other abilities. It's like they say in the video that basically, it's like it's the least enjoyable part of it. You know, they want to be just going to the part where they combine things, where they composite things. That's what is real creativity. Not simply ordering a machine to do the work for you and do average work at that. It's like you can and here's the thing, here's the other thing. The quarter crew stuff, they're often training on data that they create, that they manufacture. They're often they're 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 not making it, you know, they'll criticize AI slop just the same as everybody else, especially because it has the capacity to be so deceptive. They'll critique it and say, okay, this is what it doesn't do well. This is what it fails to do. It's not merely about bad experiment versus good experiment. It's I mean, it's like, okay, if you had something that let people say apply, you know, textures, paint textures onto a person and have that track as they dance or something like that, that would be creative and you'd be doing part of the work. But a lot of AI these days is built on a bunch of training data that is in turn built on stealing a bunch of other people's work, and using that stolen data in order to compete against those people. It's not being used by the individual, it's being used by the corporation. It's being used by the corporation to further crush down on the talent, to put pressure on the market, to get more out of them for less. It is being used for the sake of expedience rather than for the sake of enabling creativity. In fact, it's kind of it's creating a kind of degradation of. I mean, appreciating people didn't stop appreciating the ability to render a realistic landscape when, you know when photography took over. They didn't quit appreciating somebody who could paint or draw that well. They just didn't use it this that they didn't have to use that if they wanted to portray a landscape anymore. Instead, it's something that they could use to artistically portray that. It became an artistic choice. That's, the sort of unfortunate creative destruction that occurs when you're able to capture something, you're able to capture something and you no longer have to ask somebody to try and approximate it some other way. So that's sort of what's happening with, digital versus film, is that, film, but at the same time, film is making a bit of a comeback. Why is it making a bit of a comeback? Because, well, it's got its points. It's got its it can be used as a prestige sort of capture format. It adds, it's got some things it still does better than digital does. And sometimes they'll even just take digital and sort of do a re-recording of the digital on film and then port that back. So it's sort of like, they're kind of avoiding the problems of. I mean, here's the thing: film, when you film something, you only have so much film that you can physically fit, and when you see those sort of blimps, when you see those sort of cartridges on top of it, that's the film. That is, you have that much film wound up in one thing, and it's going to run by the shutter and the lens and everything, and be exposed, and then it's going to turn back onto a second reel, and that's going to take it up. And once you reach the end of that reel, it's the end of your take, whether you like it or not. It's one of the things that made it rather difficult um, for Hitchcock to do a truly real time, full, 100% no cut movie for Rope. It's why he had to hide a whole bunch of cuts, because, they essentially wanted to play it out like it was a stage play. They wanted to play it out in one continuous take, but the film could only last so long. Um, and so it lasts about 10 minutes. That's about the length of your longest take. So, but you can just go on and on with a 4K or 8K or whatever video camera. The only question is a matter of storage. Do you have the media storage to to store all that all those images, all those frames? But really, that's the creative destruction that sometimes happens. But what they're doing here, it's not, you know people can still learn to expose film, and people still do. It's not as much of an industry as it once was, but people will still make film for film cameras. uh People will still make, you know there are digital SLRs, but there's also analog SLRs. There's also cameras that, take, and people still expose on film, IMAX and things like that. It's The thing about it is, though, that once you get into AI, you're getting into a situation where you're essentially wanting to take everybody's else's work that's come before, and you want to create an average of that, and just be able to kind of semantically search through whatever you want to be able to make it do. And the problem with that ultimately is, you know, it's like with CGI. they're all. I've read quite a few. I've read quite a few American cinematographer issues while I was in college. And it was like the things they did. Like sometimes it was bleach bypass, where they would kind of skip a few steps in the development process of the film, and because of that, it would up the blacks, and it would up it would desaturate the colors. It's sort of the Saving Private Ryan 7 look. Uh, Saving Private Ryan, there are a number of things they did is a difference in shutter angle, and what a difference in they scraped off some of um, the coatings that prevent certain kinds of glare, certain kinds of artifacts from happening, and they did that to give it a more immediacy. In 1970 movies, sometimes in 1970s and 80s movies, they would pre-expose the film, kind of flash it, and that would change how the film. I can't quote to you exactly how they would do it, but that would change how the photo would develop. Would give different sort of exposure curves. What was light in the picture, what was dark in the picture. They did all kinds of different things in order to kind of get the looks that we ultimately. They did the real experimentation that the author of this essay is talking about. But they're trying to say that somebody coming along and just doing a automated average of this is somehow equivalent to that, and it's not. You're really just running a search engine on somebody else's creativity and pulling an averaged mediocre version of that out. I mean, you see what I mean. Darren Aronofsky is a great filmmaker, but when I looked at some recent stuff that they did concerning the Revolutionary War, and it all just looked generic. And really, I mean, how do you direct a character in an AI render? That's one of the things. My I have to admit, I've done my share of experimentation in AI, and one of the reasons why I stopped was that I want to be able to control composition. I want to be able to control color. I want to be able to control color and cinematography, and it doesn't do that. It doesn't really do that. And it's like, what are we trading that for? The skill, the ability to do that in the real world. So much of what I think so much of the genericization, the dullness of a lot of modern work, a lot of it is just we've created pipelines for getting things done very expediently, but expedience has come at the expense of being truly expressive, at the expense of actually giving people something that appeals to them aesthetically, that appeals to them, that looks beautiful, that looks gorgeous. I mean, you can get some gorgeous looking imagery out of a 4K camera, but do people do that? No, they're just going, oh, I like the fact that I don't have to light this so much. I like the fact that I don't have to do this or that. It's more like what they don't want to have to do that they're more concerned about than what they want to do, what they want to be able to do creatively. And that's the thing. That's what people are paying you for. That's what people are supposed to pay folks for. Not rooting around in a search engine of imagery and other people's meaning, but creating meaning, distinctive meaning of your own. And that meaning is what draws people in, what rewards their attention. That's the thing. Rewarding attention is as important as gaining it. 'Cause if you just try and gain attention all the time without rewarding it, well, it eventually, there's a kind of extinction that occurs eventually. If you ring the dinner bell enough and the dog doesn't see food, the dog's not going to perk up for that dinner bell, are they? If we want to condition people to love our stuff, we need to give them something to reward their attention. And AI doesn't ultimately reward attention. AI doesn't the AI that's creating the compositions, or rather you know, summarizing the compositions, that's figuring out what it wants to, what it's going to bring up. It's not actually thinking, considering what it's doing. When I mean, I put a lot of thought here into where I've got the level of this camera, how close it is to me. You know, I did a video last night on Facebook, and I had the camera back behind, right by my keyboard, right beneath my monitor. But for something like this, I usually kind of bring it up, or I'll elevate it, get it a good sort of up to my face perspective, because I like looking into the camera, because I feel that's a lot, otherwise I sort of kind of, if I'm constantly looking up at my preview of the image, I'm constantly looking this way. I'm looking right at my own image up there. But I have to train myself to look between the two parentheses of that Logitech camera that I've got right in front of me. And why do I do that? Because I'm looking to make an effect. I'm looking to talk to you like I'm talking person to person. It's a bit of a fiction, of course, but the point is I'm making choices that matter for how I'm transmitting my point of view to you. I'm, where I've got it pointed, it's not an accident that I've got it composed the way I've got it composed, with the walls, kind of pointing towards my head. That's not an accident, you know? Whenever you look at how a filmmaker puts their image together. Look at how a painter puts their image together. That's rarely accidental. Even if they're just trying to keep things in the shot, even if they have no real sort of big artsy fartsy ambitions, those people will often be trying to, you know, obey certain rules in order to look professional, in order to look properly composed, to at least be presentable. And that is the thing. At best, AI can resemble something that looks like what it's supposed to do. But the AI is never going to put any thought into what it's doing, nor is it going to put any creative thought. It's not going to have these intuitions and sudden, you know, sudden bursts of inspiration. It's not because it's not that humans are superior and no, it's a matter of the characteristics of the being itself that is doing the arrangement of the image. The AI currently is not intelligent. It's not. It cannot reflect on what it's doing. It cannot see, it doesn't have an emotional response to its own imagery. The way, if you look at the photography that I do, if you look at the photography that I do, I'm often looking. I often like to frame things a certain way. I often like to get. I often like gorgeous skies and reds and blues and things like that. I like, putting things on the thirds, rather than just, 100% centering everything. You know, it's not a, it's not an accident the way things are put together, but except with AI, it often is. With AI, it's at best accidentally brilliant. But the real brilliance, it's not in the machine. The real the real thing that is going, ah, that's what I want, is you. It's in you. The actual person choosing to accept this as the final image, that's you. Only you're accepting that as the final image. You're accepting that with really no control over it, other than, say, being able to prompt it or maybe use some tools to maybe select an area for, further detailing. And to me, that just seems like you're handing all of your creative choices off to something that isn't even able to properly understand what those choices mean. And what you have there is a form of communication. Movie making, TV show making, that's a form of communication. And if you're handing it all off to things that don't understand what a thing means, what an image means, what it's meant to express, if they don't have some sense of metaphor, of figurative, it's not just literal imagery we're talking about here. It's the ability to think in symbolic ways, and to think in metaphorical, allegorical, you know, poetic ways. The machine can write poetry, but it doesn't have that sort of understanding that would allow it to truly organize and connect what's inside of that poem, what's inside of that, image that's being composed. Even if we're talking about a CG image being composed, being put together, even if we're talking about that, it, you still are using, you are still using your sense of what is artistic, what is beautiful, what is meaningful. You're still using that in order. I mean, just look at the beginning of Up, the beginning of Up. The choices that they made in that beginning sequence, including that truly famous one that had people crying in the theaters. That is what human beings can do with digital tools. It is not a question of whether it's a digital tool or not. It's not even a question of whether it's a machine learning tool or not, because machine learning can be used for creative purposes to further creativity. But what it's being used for now, for the most part, is to try and obsolete skilled creativity. And the problem with that is that there's a good reason why people learn the skills and master the skills in order to function with that kind of creativity. They are doing that. We do that. We welcome that because that is how we get meaning in these works. If we're all relying upon some something that can't even think on another level, that can't go beyond just the literal, that only accidentally gets creative, only accidentally gets surreal. If that's what we're, then we're basically befouling our own nest. And that's a, nothing that the gatekeeping does. Nothing that it actually does is doing us any good. Or let me stop for a moment. The gatekeeping here, the gate is not being kept by anybody in the industry. This isn't about democratic versus, you know, or if it is, it's about, somebody basically making it like you're irrelevant if you're one of these peons who has to actually work in order to make this image, who is actually has to work in order to create this CGI here. They're making it to where we don't even have the people, we don't even have an industry to support being able to create the stuff that the AI actually needs to feed off of, to train off of, in order to be able to do actual work itself. Because here's the thing, it's a bit of a con. They've kind of created a system that can, kind of summarize everybody else's art that it's taught. But once it starts getting its own garbage as feedback, the model decays. It needs other people's creativity, but its masters are using it in order to obsolete the creativity it depends upon to actually do good stuff. AI doesn't work without actual natural intelligence and skill. So the gates that's being closed by AI is actually the gate of the ability of anybody to do really skilled work. They're going to make it uneconomic to be good at it. And what are we going to get? Just a summary of what was good about yesterday. There's something bleakly conservative about what AI is currently doing. And ironically enough, it's the kind of conservative that eats itself alive. It starves and becomes skin and bones because it just doesn't want to have to deal with the difficulties and the expense of creativity anymore. Creativity is difficult. Creativity is hard work. You're not a god just, sprinkle, you know, causing it to come into being. No, you're immortal. You're a human being. But human beings can create so much meaning. So that's it. That's my response to the article calling everything AI slop isn't criticism, it's gatekeeping. The real gate that we need to be concerned about is the door being closed on human expression. Not because we go to digital tools, not because we even go to machine learning powered tools, but because instead of trying to figure out how to create meaning ourselves, I mean, we got everybody's got HD, even 4K cameras on them right now. But are we learning how to do make movies on that? Or are we learning how to tell a computer to make that out of somebody else's creativity? Somebody who we're going to put out of a job, which is going to burn out the. That's the gate we've got to be careful of. The closing the gate on being functionally creative. I think what people want to be rewarded for all the attention they're asked to give things. And there's only so long you can, deliver people the same sort of bland AI slop before they turn away from it. And then I think the true thing that was true about early CGI. There's only so many CGI, plastic-looking guys on unicycles going around a square. There's only so much journey to the mind's eye that you can watch before that becomes, just a boring curiosity. Which is not to say that it wasn't amazing looking at those things, but back in the day. But eventually, it has to stop being just a curiosity for its own sake, and it has to actually convey some meaning. Actually, has to serve some story function. And some people just don't want to put in the effort. It's where you want to put in the work. That's where things are most important, and that's a gate that you have to open for yourself. Have a good night, y'all.